Okay, right, welcome to the new way of doing charcoal for a change. So it's going to be interesting to see how this whole setup works now. For me as well, I'm also closer to the picture in a way, which is quite nice, and you are not going to have my head or my body sort of crashing, into your picture, and you'll be able to just see my hands and exactly what I'm doing. All right, so I think that's going to make for a much nicer lesson for you guys. Overall, I think quality is just going to be better. Okay, so I'm not going to be using my picture, the actual printed out picture. I'm going to be using my phone as my reference. I just find, especially with the sort of work, the phone is a bit better with regards to being able to zoom in and check to the finest sort of little details, if you want to do it like that. So whereas I find with the picture, especially a black and white version, it doesn't always necessarily print out the way you would like it to print out. Okay. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to start off with the background first, because it's a nice big area. And also, you know what I find with the background, it just helps if you get started and it sort of loosens you up a bit. You don't want to go into the details immediately. So it does help a lot if we just get a little bit looser, get our charcoal going, get into charcoal mode. It's a bit sort of like painting. I never like to start with an absolutely detailed section in the beginning, unless, it's for a very specific reason. Okay, so I'm just going to tape this down so that it doesn't keep on moving. I'm learning as I go along. Right, so if you are going to work flat like this, it does help to actually just tape it down so that you don't have this thing moving around. The only problem is then if you need to turn your page, then obviously you're going to have to unstick it in order to be able to turn it around. Okay, so Willow charcoal. And it's got quite a nice background. So it's up to you guys if you want to make it more texture than that. But I would try and keep the background sort of relatively plain as it is, but also give it, that little bit of the table sort of effect in the background. If you don't want to put this piece in here, that little section, that transition between the two, you can just keep it plain. All right. If you like that line, then keep the line in. Otherwise, just make it a plain background. So I'm going to initially make it a plain background, and you can see it is lighter on the side and a little bit darker on that side. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the background up until about over here for the moment, and then add the rest in a bit later. Okay, just so that when I'm leaning, I'm not going to be leaning on that. If you want to carry right through, that's fine, but remember just to get a piece of paper that you can put down to stop it from smudging. Okay, so I'm just going to use the Willow charcoal. And just the side of the Willow charcoal, a nice big piece. If you have got the bigger one, get the bigger one and just start putting down. Okay, now here again, if you look at the reference, so if you look at the reference, we've got quite a light area over here, and then it becomes darker as we go along. So we're going to try and keep this relatively light when we're putting our color down, or our charcoal down. So with this particular one, it's got a very sort of fibrous texture. And we want to try and recreate that fibrous texture. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our Willow charcoal, and I want you to remember the shape of your coconut. So it's got a round shape like this. So I'm just going to explain to you now as I'm busy drawing. So let me just first get this dark piece in here. I just want to make sure I get my lines in the right place. Okay, there we go. All right. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and use my charcoal on its side, but not flat like this, more like this. And I'm going to sort of almost follow the cross contours of the coconut. Okay, so you can use it flat like that. It is a bit awkward to do it like that unless you turn your page. So I'm going to try and touch it quite lightly. I'm not making it very, very thick. I don't want to have it too smooth a surface. I want to try and get that texture in as quickly as possible without doing too much other work on top of it. So I'm already getting some of that texture, and it's obviously darker on the right here. Okay. So just sort of gently touch your paper. So don't press too hard. So that's working quite nicely. And then obviously as you go out, then you're going to press it a little lighter. Okay, just a little bit lighter there. And I'm also just trying to follow the cross contour. You may not think it makes a difference because we're using such a big surface, but just by using that feeling, that round feeling, it does actually create a very subtle cross contour there. Feel. Okay. So much lighter there. It's a fair amount darker here, so we're gonna do it darker there. So try and get it nicely to the edge here. We can clean up these edges here. I'd rather go over slightly, just like we did with the background, but just don't lose your drawing. So try and stick to the drawing if possible. And then I am bringing in some lines there. So inadvertently the lines came in just by chance. So I'm going to try and bring in one or two sort of dark lines just to sort of give it that texture feel. So almost like a scratchy little line. So don't use a solid line. So I don't want you to draw a solid line going down. Sort of break the line in between to give that sort of fibrous texture. And remember to squint your eyes every now and again. Really does help. Oops, sorry about that. And then this section, you can either leave it as it is, but if you really want to also sort of bring almost a bit of a line, you can maybe do one or two small little dark lines. Just be very careful you don't go too dark, just to give it also that sort of round feel and also that fibrous feel. You can do that. Otherwise, what you can do is you can go in with the eraser if you prefer and bring in some whiter areas again. But you can just enhance it slightly by bringing in a little bit more texture. And as I described in the other class as well, whenever you're thinking about the textures of your objects, imagine taking your finger and actually running your finger over this coconut. And how would it feel if you had to touch the texture of this coconut? So you would never feel a smooth surface. Your fingers would just catch little bits of the actual fiber on the coconut. So when you're actually drawing, that is how you would put the charcoal on. You would just catch the paper as if your finger was catching the texture. And that's how you create a texture with charcoal. If it's a smooth texture, then you put it on smoothly. Okay, if that makes sense. Right, so I'm just going to take my hard eraser and then maybe just bring in some little lighter sections over here. So more towards the lip there of the coconut. Remember to blow every now and again, because what happens is if you've got too much of your eraser on there, it will actually make your picture look quite weird if you keep on catching it. So you can see there I'm creating a little bit more texture over there just by taking the hard eraser with this little sharp edge and just creating a little bit more texture. It's actually working very nicely. You can even go into the dark areas a little bit like I'm doing now. Okay, now I'm going to do that dark lip around it. So here, if you feel that your willow charcoal hasn't got a sharp enough edge, you can take your charcoal pencil. Just make sure it's either the soft or the medium, not the hard. And if you just want to sketch that line in there, just only where it's dark, okay? So you're not going to do it obviously on your light edges because you don't want a black line there. But where it is very black over there, you can go in with your charcoal pencil just to sketch it out so that you've got the shape there. And remember, this has got a completely different texture. So what we do here is we go into it with our blending stump and we just smooth it out a bit. Okay. Because that is a completely different texture to your willow charcoal. So you can go with your blending stump and you can just press into it quite hard, and your black is going to stay there now, but it will be smooth. Okay, and you can only really do this with a blending stump. You can't do this with any other of the other tools. You really need to have that sharp edge. So it's just basically where you have a small area, black area like that. I prefer to work with a pencil with that. It's rather tricky to try and do it with the willow charcoal. Just remember, if you do make a mistake here, then you're not going to be able to really erase that area. So just make sure you do it correctly first time round. And just go according to your drawing. I'm just going to do that little piece over there, and the rest I'm actually going to fill in with willow charcoal. You can fill it in with the pencil if you prefer, that's fine. But here I want to be able to create a little bit of texture using the eraser going into this dark area here. And then I'm just going to go into these little edges over here just to create that little bit of texture. So here you can either use your pencil eraser, or if you prefer, you can use your sharp hard eraser. You can just cut a piece off there, but just make sure you have a relatively sharp piece. If you can get one of these, try and get one of these eraser pencils. They're just very handy for small little areas like that. It just gives you a lot more control, and also you can press harder. You can't press so hard with that eraser. It doesn't really take off as much as I would like if I use that instead. Okay, but I'm going to use the hard eraser for the moment, just to show you can do it with a hard eraser as well, but that one just gives you a little bit more control like a pencil, which is quite handy. But this is working perfectly fine if that's all you do have. Okay, so yeah, there we go. That's actually cool. Cool. All right, so now I'm going to go into my white coconut. So here we're going to be using the paintbrush. Okay, so you'll notice I didn't really go too dark with the initial sketch because it's quite a subtle sort of variation between the different grays. So all I did was I just basically sketched out very lightly that sort of inner piece, the hollow. All right, just so I know where it is. But you don't have to. I mean, you didn't have to do that. It would have worked perfectly fine because it's quite a simple shape to actually draw. Okay, so we're going to be using a paintbrush and your charcoal dust. I'm going to go now in with the paintbrush. Okay, let me get my picture there. Cool. Right, so I'm going to leave the white relatively white for the moment. I'm just going to start doing in this darker section first. Okay, so let's just get that middle piece in. And just if you are working flat like I am now and not standing, then you're going to need to blow. If you're standing, then the charcoal does tend to sort of fall down, so you don't have to blow too much, which is quite nice. And you can see it's relatively darkish there, so you're going to have to go over it a few times with the willow charcoal and the dust to get it that sort of transition there. And then where that little dark piece is over here, so where that dark section is over there, that you're going to actually have to go in with the willow charcoal itself, all right, because it is quite dark. So that I'm going to rather actually bring in with the willow charcoal, and then I will fade it in. And then that I will just use the paintbrush then just to soften it slightly. And remember, you can use different size paintbrushes, so it does help to have smaller ones as well, just for the smaller areas. And then you just got a nice tip to work with as well. So keep on blowing. And you can see here what I've done as well is I'm actually just taking some of that dark now, blending it in. And I'm still following those lines that you can actually see with the charcoal, with the coconut. All right, so you can see they sort of got these lines going in towards the coconut. Okay, so it's not just a random texture. It actually has got a slightly almost fibrous texture to it as well, the inside. Okay, now the other thing is, if you look at that shadow there in the actual reference, you'll see it has got a bit of a dent in it. I don't know if you can see that it's actually made a dent. You don't have to bring that dent in. If you keep your lines straight, then it'll look flat, okay? But as soon as you make your lines curved, it's going to look like there's a dent. So just remember that when you're trying to get a flat surface over here, you must just be very careful. I'm going to quickly just do a little sketch for you just so that you can see. So it's all to do with your cross contours. Just going to lean that on there for the moment. Okay. So, so you've got your edge like that. Okay. All right. If you do this, then your edge is going to look round. It's going to look like it's got a dent in it. If you do this, then your edge is going to look flat. Okay. So if you want a flat edge, remember to keep if you are going to put lines in, to keep your lines flat like that, to give it a flat surface. If you want that slight curvature in it, a slight concave, then you must use your lines like that. Okay, so that's the difference between the two. So I've brought in a little bit of a concave there. Okay, now I'm going to bring in my other little textures, just using this paintbrush. And you can really go with a much smaller paintbrush if you prefer, if you'd rather use a much smaller paintbrush to get this. Because remember, you can go back into it again with your eraser because it's going to be so light. Yeah.
Are you using with your watercolor
yeah, just a soft, it's a very cheap one.
How hard is it?
No, it's very soft. It's extremely soft.
It's very soft.
Yeah, just a water, exactly what I sort of use. These are the cheap watercolor paintbrushes, so yeah, that's the only one to really use because it can actually pick up quite a lot of dust, almost like with your watercolor. Yes. Yeah, it's actually it works very, very well. So remember, when you're looking at your reference as well and you're looking at your original, always compare the two tonalities, where the tonalities change. So you must check those tonalities, and then you can see immediately if you've gone too light or too dark, or if you need to change it a little bit. So here I feel I need to go a little bit darker inside here, just a fraction. So what you can do there, if you find that your charcoal pencil, your charcoal dust isn't going dark enough, so here you're just going to be quite careful. You can go in a little bit with your Willow charcoal, but just very softly. So I'm just barely even touching the paper. But I definitely want this to be a little bit darker because I feel that needs to have that nice difference in value over there between the two. But I still want to try and keep that soft texture. Okay, but it's not going quite dark enough for my liking. And I definitely want a little bit darker, so I'm just going to go over it with the Willow charcoal, and then just, let's see, go in with the brush, and then just tap it slightly so it's gone a little bit darker. So my main focus here is if I'm actually looking at this as my reference, I'm sort of looking at the tonalities. I'm actually trying to get those tonalities right, you know, so that the transition is correct. Okay, that's the biggest thing for me. So for instance, where I'm looking over here, I can see that's actually a little bit too white. It needs to go slightly grayer. Okay, but I mean, as I said, you can go a bit overboard as well. So you've got to be careful. Sometimes once you've done everything, then you look back at that section and you say, oh, actually, you know what? It's actually fine. It doesn't need to go any grayer or whatever. All right. Because what you're doing is you're comparing it against a sort of a white background, and that can be a bit misleading sometimes. So yeah. So let's just go back in. That was where I used the charcoal pencil, which was a little bit hard there. So I'm just going to go into that. And again, I'm just going in the same direction the wood actually is going. And then I'm going to use the pencil. Not the pencil, sorry, the so you can either do it on the flat surface, or if you just want to make the lines already, you can do that. And you go into it. That. And now you can get your woody texture almost instantly. I wish painting was this easy when it comes to wood.